One day, I accidentally overheard my stepmother and stepsister plotting to cheat me out of my father's inheritance. I was shocked and realized I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I packed my things and moved out, starting a new life on my own, facing a year full of struggles and hardship. For an entire year, I survived without any family support. But eventually, the truth came out. My father found out what they had tried to do, and everything changed from that moment on. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was just heading to my room with a cup of tea when I heard my name in the voices drifting from the living room. My stepmother Cindy and my stepsister Beth were talking about how to get rid of me. I froze in place, my heart skipping a beat. They weren't even lowering their voices. I'm Haley, 24 years old, daughter of an ordinary man who remarried far too quickly after my mother's death. Cindy came into our lives when I was 19, bringing along Beth, who was 2 years younger than me. At first, I tried to welcome them, tried to believe we could be a family because that's what my dad wanted. But it was all an act. Cold smiles, fake concern. I kept overlooking it for his sake. Now I was hearing them planning to make sure I didn't get a single cent of my father's inheritance. "We need to get rid of her before the will is finalized," Cindy said. "Otherwise, we'll have to share," Beth chimed in. My chest tightened painfully. They were discussing ways to sabotage me, break my laptop so I couldn't apply for jobs, block access to the family car so I couldn't get to interviews. I stood there in the dark, feeling the ground crack beneath me. Everything I believed in crumbled at once. I knew Dad trusted them. He was always busy with work. He wouldn't see how they were slowly pushing me out of the house. I stumbled back to my room, silent, numb. I buried my face in my pillow and fought the scream building inside. I needed to think. I couldn't just go to my father. I had no proof. It would be my word against theirs. They'd make me look like a hysteric. I decided I would leave, quietly, on my own terms. No scandal. I started looking for a place to live, messaged old friends, combed through rental listings. I was ready to take anything, just to breathe air that wasn't poisoned by their presence. I settled for a tiny studio in a rough neighborhood. Expensive, cramped, but it would be mine. I had no job yet, but that didn't matter anymore. I would find a way. When I told Dad I wanted to move out, he was surprised but didn't ask many questions. Cindy and Beth couldn't hide their glee. They helped me pack so eagerly it felt like mockery. On my last night in that house, I overheard them again. This time, they were discussing how to convince Dad to rewrite the will once I was gone. And that's when I understood. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving behind a family I had loved, a family that had never truly existed. Moving out felt like salvation, but in reality, it was a trial. My new apartment was tiny, with peeling walls and noisy neighbors. I spent the first night sleepless, lying on an old mattress on the floor, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself this was real. I had no job, and my savings were running low. Every day, I sent out dozens of resumes, willing to accept any job. Sometimes it felt like nobody needed me. On rare evenings, when my father's calls broke the silence, I pretended everything was fine. I didn't want him to hear the fear and despair in my voice. Cindy and Beth, meanwhile, made no effort to contact me. They vanished from my life as if I had never existed. Honestly, it was easier that way. In the first weeks, I lived in constant tension. Every knock at the door, every unknown message sent waves of panic through me, as if they could still find a way to reach me. I felt betrayed at every turn. I was alone. Completely alone. Sometimes I thought I had made a mistake by not talking to Dad. Maybe he would have believed me. But then I remembered the happiness in his eyes when he looked at Cindy and realized, no, he had chosen them. I started picking up side gigs, food delivery, helping in small offices, anything to scrape together enough for rent and groceries. Sometimes I skipped meals to stretch my limited funds for a few more days. At night, I scoured job listings until my eyes blurred. Then in the morning, I went back out as if on autopilot. In moments of weakness, I thought about my mom. I imagined her hugging me, telling me everything would be all right. That gave me the strength to get up and keep moving. But the loneliness gnawed at me. I developed a habit of writing letters to Cindy and Beth. Letters I never sent. I just poured out my anger and pain onto the pages. My therapist said it would help release the burden, but for now, it only made me feel more exhausted. Sometimes I dreamed about returning home, exposing them, seeing the shock on their faces. But then I remembered reality. Without proof, my words would mean nothing. I had to build a new life. Without them. Without old hopes. Just me and the road I would choose for myself. Life went on. Step by step, I was building a new routine. I bought a used couch, a few plates from a clearance sale, and hung a cheap print on the wall to cover the empty white space. For the first time in a long while, it was my own space, I worked 2 jobs, during the day as an assistant in accounting, at night in a warehouse for an online store. I slept in fragments, ate on the run. Sometimes I wanted to give up, to walk away from it all. But I knew what I was fighting for. For myself, to never again be dependent on anyone. Dad called less and less. His voice sounded more distant with each call. I understood. Cindy and Beth were working to erase me from his life. They were probably telling him I was ungrateful, that I had abandoned the family. Sometimes I wanted to scream the truth into the phone, but I held back. Losing them was one thing. Losing my father completely was something else. Sometimes at night, I sat curled up in the kitchen crying silently. It felt like I was clinging to life by my fingertips. But every morning, I got up again. I searched for the strength to keep going. Work was overwhelming, and money was still tight. Any unexpected bill felt like a disaster. One time, my washing machine broke, and I washed my clothes by hand in the bathtub for a week just to save money. Small humiliations like that seemed to mock me, but I stubbornly pushed forward. At the warehouse, I met a woman named Kelly. She was a few years older and immediately sensed my guardedness. Without prying, she sometimes left me coupons for free meals or gave me a ride home after shifts. Her simple kindness warmed me more than any blanket. One day, Kelly asked, "Why don't you ever talk about your family?" I stayed silent. She just nodded and never asked again. That meant more to me than any conversation. Sometimes I had nightmares. Cindy and Beth whispering behind my back, plotting again, and me, the naive, trusting girl, all over. I would wake up sweating, but now I knew. It was just a dream. They no longer had any power over me. Reality was harsh, but it was a reality I chose for myself. I hadn't seen Beth in months, but running into her at the grocery store felt like a slap across the face. She spotted me first, too far away to avoid, and came over with a fake brightness that made my stomach turn. She asked about my job, my apartment, my life. I answered in clipped sentences, barely maintaining a smile, counting down the seconds until I could leave. Afterward, I sat in my car with the engine off, staring blankly at the steering wheel, shaking. It hit me that even after everything, even after carving a new life out of the wreckage, a part of me was still terrified of them. That realization gnawed at me all night. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying old memories, wondering when exactly they started seeing me as an obstacle instead of family. The next morning, I seriously considered leaving the city altogether. A fresh start somewhere they'd never find me, never haunt me by accident in a grocery store. The idea sounded tempting. Freedom. Clean air. No past weighing down my chest. I spent half the day researching rentals in towns I'd never even visited. That evening, I got a text from my father. Simple words, but they froze me in place. "We need to talk. It's important." For a minute, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with possibilities, most of them bad. Did he find out something? Was he sick? Had Cindy and Beth poisoned him against me completely? I answered. "When?" His reply came fast. "Tomorrow. Dinner." I spent the entire night twisting in my bed, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I hated how one text could throw me into chaos. I hated how much power they still held over my life, even now. But deep down, a tiny part of me dared to hope. Maybe it wasn't bad news. Maybe, just maybe, it was the conversation I had feared and wished for at the same time. Maybe the truth was finally about to come out. I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't run anymore. My father showed up exactly at 6, standing awkwardly outside my apartment like he didn't know whether he was welcome. I let him in, heart hammering against my ribs, the air between us thick with unspoken words. We sat at the kitchen table, both clutching cups of coffee we didn't drink. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Then he finally spoke. "I know something's wrong, June. I need to hear it from you." His voice wasn't angry, just tired, defeated. I opened my mouth and the words tumbled out faster than I could control. About overhearing Cindy and Beth plotting, about the sick feeling that had taken root inside me, about why I left without a real explanation. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't downplay how alone and betrayed I had felt. As I spoke, his face changed. Confusion first, then disbelief, and finally a deep, gut-wrenching sadness that made me want to stop talking. But I didn't. I owed it to myself to finish. When I finally ran out of words, the silence that followed was deafening. My father looked older than I had ever seen him, like the truth had drained the last bit of energy from his body. I didn't know," he said hoarsely, staring at the table. I thought they cared about you." I wanted to scream that he should have seen it, that he should have known. But I bit my tongue. He wasn't the enemy. Not really. What are you going to do? I asked instead. He looked up at me, eyes shining with unshed tears. First, I'm going to find out if what you heard was true. Then, I don't know. I nodded. That was all I could ask. As he left, he squeezed my shoulder, a clumsy, broken gesture of love. I watched him walk down the hall, feeling both lighter and heavier all at once. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the burden alone. The week after that conversation stretched endlessly. Every day I woke up half expecting a message from my father. Some final verdict that would either set me free or crush me completely. But the silence dragged on, heavy and suffocating. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts, volunteering longer hours, anything to keep my mind busy. But late at night, lying awake in the dark, my thoughts always circled back to the same gnawing question. Would he believe them or me? Would he choose comfort over truth? Would I lose him too? On Friday night, my phone finally buzzed. It was a short text from Dad. Can you come over tomorrow? I need to talk to you. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to pretend I never saw it, to delay whatever painful truth was waiting on the other side. But I couldn't. I typed yes with trembling fingers. Saturday was a blur. I barely remembered driving across town. I barely remembered parking outside the house that had once felt like home and now looked like a stage set from a life I didn't belong to anymore. Dad met me at the door, his face drawn and pale. He didn't say much, just led me inside. The house was eerily quiet. No Cindy. No Beth. We sat again at the kitchen table, our battleground, our confessional. He didn't drag it out. He told me he had looked into everything, had found financial irregularities, manipulations, a web of small betrayals woven so tightly around him that he hadn't even seen it happening. He had confronted Cindy. She had denied it at first, then lashed out, accusing him of abandoning her. Beth had cried, blaming everything on fear and misunderstanding. In the end, none of it mattered. He was filing for divorce. He was cutting them both out of his life and out of his will. As he spoke, I sat frozen, barely breathing. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it all. But mostly I felt a raw, aching relief. I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't been paranoid. I had been right. In the days that followed, the pieces of my old life crumbled faster than I could process. My father moved into a small apartment across town, leaving the house, the memories, and the wreckage behind. Cindy and Beth tried to reach out a few times, angry voicemails, desperate texts, but he blocked them all. I didn't ask him for details. I didn't want to know the ugly aftermath. It was enough to see that he had finally chosen himself. Chosen me. Our relationship was awkward at first. Like we were relearning how to be father and daughter without the weight of betrayal between us. We started small, coffee on Sunday mornings, short phone calls during the week, sharing silly articles and old memories. It felt fragile, like a glass bridge, but it was real. I still lived in my tiny apartment, but it didn't feel as claustrophobic anymore. It felt earned. Every dent in the wall, every scratch on the floor was part of a life I had fought for. A life no one could take from me. My work at the youth center became more meaningful too. I poured everything into it. My patience, my anger, my hope. The kids didn't know the full story, but somehow they understood the bruises you can't see. I wasn't just helping them. They were helping me heal too. One evening after a long shift, my father called. His voice was lighter than it had been in years. He said he wanted to set up a trust for me, separate from anything connected to his marriage. I told him it wasn't necessary, that I wasn't staying for the money. He laughed, a soft, tired sound. I know, June. I know, it's not about the money. It's about making sure you're protected, no matter what. I didn't argue. Maybe it was his way of atoning. Maybe it was his way of saying sorry for not seeing sooner. Either way, I accepted. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was living. Summer came quietly, without the fireworks or fanfare I used to crave. Life settled into something steady, something almost peaceful. I signed a lease on a slightly bigger apartment, one with real sunlight and enough space to breathe. My father and I kept building, slowly, carefully. Some days it felt easy, natural even. Other days I could see the guilt flicker across his face, could feel it hanging between us like an unfinished sentence. But I didn't push. We were doing the best we could with what we had left. Cindy and Beth faded into the background of my life. Occasionally I heard rumors about legal troubles, about money problems, but I didn't seek out details. They were no longer my burden to carry. Their absence wasn't a wound anymore. It was a healed scar, One evening after volunteering, I sat by the river watching the sunset bleed into the water. I thought about the girl I had been a year ago, the one packing a suitcase in the dark, heartbroken and terrified. She would never have believed we'd get here. She would never have believed we'd survive. But we did. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. Survival is messy. Healing even messier. But we made it. I made it. I pulled out my phone and texted my father. "Thank you for believing me." It took him only a minute to respond. "Thank you for not giving up." I smiled, pocketing the phone. The past would always be a part of me, stitched into the seams of who I was. But it didn't define me anymore. It didn't own me. Ahead of me was a long stretch of unknown, a life unwritten, filled with risks and wrong turns and maybe, just maybe, moments of real happiness too. I didn't know where the road would lead, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid to find out. I stood up, brushing dirt from my jeans, and walked toward the future. Not running, not hiding, just walking. One steady, certain step at a time.